Oh, it is now.
Oh, look at that, just as I spoke. Well, I'm going to start out. I had uh, some people call it a God shot. It's just one of those things where you know God is at work when you think God is not at work. And I think this is very important for what we're talking about today. The experience of God as opposed to just having, theology in your head. So I was flying Southwest, which fortunately had planes uh, and pilots and crew. So I was supposed to fly from Sacramento to Denver Thursday. And I thought I had gotten one of these early bird things, but early bird is getting later and later. So I ended up with something. B37 was my number, which means 60 people in A and another 30 in B were all ahead of me. So there were over 100 people on the plane when I got on. So I knew I wasn't going to get a seat by the window, and I didn't want an aisle seat. So I was going to have a middle seat. And fortunately, I didn't have too much to carry on. And the woman attendant said, "Oh, that'll fit under your seat if you take a middle seat." So I walked down I got to row 5, and there were these two women. One of the things so I was feeling badly that I didn't have, a better number, get on earlier. But it all worked out because everybody is seated in the aisle and the window. So there's middle seats. So you know with whom you'll be sitting. When you get on the plane early and you take a window seat and this 350-pound man gets on and takes the middle seat, it's going to be a bad ride. So I knew who the two people were. I saw the middle seat, and these two women were somewhat fit, to use a nice word. So I said, "Oh, I'll have plenty of room." So I sat down next to them, and I bags under the seat. It's fine. So as is my want, I didn't want to try too much conversation in case they weren't interested. But I look at what they're doing, and this woman on my left at the window, elderly woman, she was reading some pages, not of a book, but of a manuscript. And the top word was eschatology. That's a churchy word, eschatology. Nobody reads eschatology unless they're involved in religious issues. Well, I didn't ask her if she was a nun. She might have been a little hard of hearing because she didn't hear whatever I was saying, I think. But because I said, you must be involved in religion since you're doing eschatology. But she didn't go on with that too much. Any case, I pull out the novel that I'm reading, which I highly recommend. It's Powell's new book, The Lincoln Highway. And he wrote A Gentleman in Moscow, a wonderful book. So this is a new novel. And I'm pulling it out because I'm going to read it. And she starts and she says, "Oh," she says, "how is that book?" I said, "Well, I'd only read about 150 pages." I said, "Well, so far it's very good." He said, "Did you read his first book?" And I said, "Yes." And so she went on giving me some things. And she knew a lot about him. So I suspect she was a writer herself. And so she said, I said, "He's a wonderful writer." She says, "You have to keep writing until you find your own voice. Because until you find your own voice, you'll only be telling someone else's story." That was a profound moment for me. And I realized that in some ways, that's exactly what I do. And it's what I encourage you to do. For instance, I'm going to be talking about Rufus Jones, but you can read the book about Rufus Jones. So, and I'm not going to talk about the life of Rufus Jones per se, but taking some of the things from Rufus Jones and passing it through me. And how does it affect me? In other words, the teacher or the preacher should be telling their story of whatever event they're referring to. So to me, bad preaching is when the preacher tells you all about Jesus Christ from a theological point of view. Good preaching is when he or she tells you about Jesus Christ from how it's working in their life, their story. So when you're talking to somebody and you say, "Oh, I read Teresa of Avila or Teresa of Lisieux," say Carmelites, okay, in deference to Miss Miller. So if you just parrot what the person said, I don't think it's really going to grab people very much. It never grabbed me. It just becomes a point of information. But when you tell me how it affects your life, how it has worked on you, both in the good and the bad, and this is what this woman said: when you find your own voice, you'll talk about your story, both the pluses and the good and the bad is very important to bring out too. And I do that a lot of times in my blogs. So that's the way I think you pass on your spirituality. Uh, it's not just saying what somebody else said. I can simply refer somebody, why don't you read this person, and they'll be very helpful to you. But once I start talking, it has to be filtered through me. And I think that's what catches people and what moves people. And that's what great writing is all about. It's about telling your story through the incidences and the story of, say, the fiction, or telling your story through writing theology. A catechism book is boring, but it's informational, and we need information. We need something that holds us together, a common belief. But where it really lights up your life to make a change in you is where you say how it affects you and affects your life. And I think that's what all these writers are doing. Rufus Jones is, if you want to know all about Quakers, I would go to Wikipedia or something like that, or the history of Quakers. But if you're going to read Rufus Jones, you're going to read about how Quakerism has moved Rufus Jones to become who Rufus Jones is. And that's what makes these people important, is they learn to tell their story, both the good and the bad, whatever it may be. So keep that in mind when you're passing everything on to others. The word, for instance, the word sin, it's a word that religion picks up on, and we're taught from a very early age that it refers to breaking rules and or commandments or whatever you want. And they're all the rules of, they're commandments of God. But after that, he only gave 10. The rest are rules made by institutional religions and such, basically to control people. So you have to go to Mass on Sunday is the rule. I mean, did God say that? Just said God rested on Sunday. So what we do is we go to Mass on Sunday, and then we busy ourselves the rest of the day, knocking ourselves out, doing all kinds of other things. So we don't do what God did on Sunday, but we obey the rule. So I think what we need to look at is think from a whole different perspective, because for Rufus Jones, and for me for that matter, religion is supposed to be that which binds us, builds bridges. And the basic bridge is between myself and God, and then myself and my neighbor. Love God and then love your neighbor. So sin is what makes for separation. An action that separates me from my true self. The true self, the person who is able to get in touch with their true self, and that's their story, both for the better or worse. So sin makes for a separation from my deepest self, the one that whom God made me to be, not the one that the culture or the institutional church wants me to be. So Rufus uses an image of the cataracts, which I'm developing, as many of us are, little by little. And cataracts destroy your ability to see clearly, but it doesn't destroy the light. And I thought that was a wonderful image. In other words, I can't see, but that doesn't mean out there isn't just fine. It means you can't connect to it because of some deficiency within yourself. In this case, it's cataracts. So what we can't see, when we try to become somebody we're not, or when we are offensive to other people, or when we ignore the depths of God in our own life because we're too busy building up our own egos or running from fears or whatever else it might be, our ideals of what life should be like, family, work, and so on and so forth. When we do that, we don't see what is often called non-duality. In other words, we don't see oneness because we have the spiritual cataracts. The world, the universe is one. Space is not space. It's connective. We only see space. We envision space, but there's a lot more going on. So we're all one, but until we get in touch with our deeper self, we're all about separation and competition and prejudice and all the other things that you've got going on. So what we want is, as we can get in touch with our deeper self through what I believe, and I think you believe, is a deeper meditation. The light, we often say the light comes on. No, the light's always on. God is always within us, doesn't change. What comes on is your ability to connect to it. That's what comes on. So the idea is, in worship, for instance, worship is not supposed to be some obligatory thing that you do, that you put up with. I mean, you're trying to teach your child good habits. So you bring them to church and you think, this is good. I should take them to church. They should get an experience. But what if they're bored to death? What if the message doesn't speak to them at all? Can you, and you keep dragging them to something that they can't get in touch with. Now you can tell them, well, there in the tabernacle is Jesus Christ in the host. That's catechism. What does it mean to you? Why are you there? And if you're just as bored as they are, what's the point? And you should be going to a Paulist church because we're great preachers. But that's, well, you can go to a Paulist church in Knoxville, you people. In any case, you go into the cathedral and all whatnot. You get what you get. So the worship should be direct experience of God, not filtered through the ritual. The ritual is supposed to help to have the direct experience. If you're not having that, either something's the matter, and it could be with you, not having a deep enough contemplative life so that when you show up at church, you don't expect a miracle of connectivity. It's already happening. And that's the way it works for me. When I have a deeper, when I'm practicing my practice and just not just talking the talk, and I go to church, I can really connect to that box, the tabernacle, and what's in it. Who's in it? Jesus Christ, with whom I have a very personal relationship and who I want to continue to feed me in this particular way, in the ritual way. So it needs to be a personal experience, and it will be if I can practice the presence in the rest of my life. A woman named Beatrice Bruteau, Bruteau, who I think we spoke about, and we have her books in our bookstore. She says, here's what salvation is. I think it's a wonderful explanation. She says, when we fully believe and embrace God as love, then we're saved. Well, what do you get out of a head trip doctrinal statement? Well, Jesus died to save us from to save us. Okay, so he did everything, we do nothing? I don't think so. I think Beatrice Bruteau is right on. You become saved when you fully believe and embrace God as love. And all that Jesus Christ did is to help us to connect with that. That's what it's supposed to do. That's what the rituals are supposed to do. That's what Jesus Christ is doing. He's saying that God is love, and the incarnation is to express that. I think about the incarnation. You know, a lot of people say that they're Christians, or they have some affinity to Christianity. And here's what they believe. They said, okay, I read your scriptures. And Jesus Christ, he's born in Nazareth as a carpenter. And then he goes out on his mission. And there's a baptism scene. And God says, this is my beloved son in whom I am well pleased. And they said, oh, that's when he became God's special person. And I said, I don't think so, at least not for me. It's just not working for me, because then you could say, well, did it happen to Buddha? I mean, Krishna? I mean, any number of other people that I could bring up. So what am I on this Christian path for? What is that? But if the incarnation is really so, then God became human from the get-go, that he really is God in the flesh. And in the flesh, showing me tremendous love, and then saying, hey, Terry, you're in the flesh too. How much of this can you do? Well, none of it, until I can fully believe and embrace God is love. Then I get an energy and a vision and a light of non-duality. So God is not remote. And I don't believe that either. God is not remote, someplace else. A lot of what's going on in my churches is pastors are encouraging people. I don't know what happened in Vatican II, but they're encouraging people to go to church and spend time in church, exposition of Blessed Sacrament, various novenas and stuff. Go to church, and there you'll find God. Well, I'm not saying you don't. Yes, but you miss out. And of course, all those things, there's a lot of words and stuff like that, but you also miss out that God is in you always, and you lose a sense of your own worthiness and your own lovability. I mean, if you think you're just nothing unless you go to church and find God, then why would you believe God is love? I mean, what if somebody says, I'll love you if you come to this particular place? You wouldn't believe that person loves you. They've got to love you 24/7 without conditions. That's what we're looking for in a partner. And so that's when salvation comes. So God is not remote, is within us always, non-duality. And God is not simply transcendent. For Rufus Jones, he de-emphasizes transcendence, and he's very much into incarnation, that God is immanent, and it's unveiled, if you will, in Jesus Christ. And what happens when you get rid of cataracts? You're unveiled, and the light shines. So he's unveiled, or he, she, it, God. The ultimate reality is immanent, unveiled in Christ, and especially on the cross. And another thing that's come to my mind, we talk about the cross, and I have any number of people and we're told, bear your cross, take up your cross. Anyone who does not pick up their cross cannot really follow me. There are a number of people that come to me and they say, I want spiritual direction. What they want is marriage counseling or family counseling or work counseling. They come to me, they present this problem with this other person. And what am I supposed to do about this other person? And I said, well, I'd start by going to a marriage counselor or whatever. I said, because I can talk to you about the spiritual life. And here's what I know. That's your cross. Bear it and grow from it. For instance, it's, oh, yeah, it's easy for you to say you don't have a spouse or whatever. Well, I live with a bunch of men who sometimes I feel are jerks, especially when I came here. I looked at them and says, why doesn't this guy do what he's supposed to? Why doesn't that guy do what he's supposed to? Why are these people so messy? Why are they so selfish and so self-centered? Blah, 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 blah. If they would just change, I'd be happy. Well, I got news for you. They didn't change. The one who was supposed to change is Terry Ryan. And they were here so I can change and become all God wants me to be. They become my cross. And you know what? I stopped judging them. And then they weren't such a problem. But even if they were a problem, I just stopped judging them. I says, they're in my life to change me and make me more like Christ, and to see non-duality instead of differences, and so on and so forth. How about a little compassion and kindness on my part instead of, talking about everybody else? So there you go. That's what it's all about. So I've stopped trying to help people figure out all the other things in their life, and said, this is what I know from my own experience. I don't know, and I've never been married. I don't know how to deal with your spouse. You're the one who chose it, not me. I said, I can only tell you, I find a lot of things, and I realize they're my cross, and they never change. Your boss won't change. A lot of things won't change, not in our lifetime. And maybe they will, and maybe I can do some things to help them ecologically and all. But basically, I have to change, and that's an inside job. So I think, so Rufus Jones, back to him for a moment, he quotes Emerson. Emerson, I thought he was not even hardly a Christian. He's a deist or something like that. But I got to read him a little more. This is what he says. Emerson, 19th century guy, and Rufus was born in the 19th century. So, I mean, people like Emerson are relatively current. It's like us reading Thomas Merton. They haven't been dead that long. So Emerson he said, there is no veil or wall that separates God from us. Well, that's Thomas Merton. That basically is Christianity. I think that's basically spirituality of any religion. There's nothing that separates God from us, nothing that separates us from ultimate reality, except our own way of the false self-centeredness, way we see the world, are the cataracts of the soul, if you will. So, and that what makes a perversion of the inner light and a perversion of my spiritual path, which is Christianity. And so he brings up, he says, here's how you pervert the inner light. You accept war as normal. The solution to things is war is normal. The industrial military complex is just the way of life. The second thing is how we treat one another so basely. We did this with slavery. Slavery hadn't ended all that much in the past of his life. And we might try to save slaves, or we would say to people, become a Christian or we'll make you a slave. We had all this kind of history in our Western European background. So the way we treat one another, and just the way we treat one another so basely. And he believes that the church is not the one and only vehicle of grace. Think of me saying that at the pulpit. Well, it'd be my last homily, except here. I get away with that with these liberal Trappists. But so he doesn't seem to be too much of a fan of maybe Augustine, I don't know, but certainly not a fan of Calvin's view of a totally corrupt person. He didn't believe people are totally corrupt. That's why he didn't go in that direction of denominationalism. He says you've got to venture into a firsthand experience, and then you will realize how incorruptible you yourself really are. And he says, stop. I've said this before. Other people have said it. I don't know if he said it. But no, he didn't say this. I'm saying this. Don't accept secondhand goods, which is somebody telling you catechism answers or what you're supposed to do. You want a direct experience of God, firsthand experience, and you can have it. The trouble with institutional religions is it's a lot of secondhand goods. It doesn't mean to be, but it ends up being that, not because what they're presenting is not enough. It's because we don't bring enough of ourselves to it. And then we can't overcome the institutional part of it by our own depth of spirituality. We are distant. There are people who are distant from the ecclesiastical and the dogmatic. They just, a lot of people in my tradition are somehow able to make peace with the ecclesiastical and the dogmatic. They accept it; it's fine, um, and but they're looking for more deeper as well. The nuns, NONES, as they're called, that none of that speaks to them. The ecclesiastical and the dogmatic, and that's often what we lead with. We lead with the ecclesiastical and the dogmatic, and they look at us almost cross-eyed. What are you talking about? You've got to lead with your story. That's what connects people. I've met any number of people that said, I became interested in finding out more about the church because they read somebody or they met somebody. And either in the reading or in the meeting, they heard that person's story, the honesty of it. And that moved them to explore something deeper, like in themselves. You see this all the time in Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance. So we got to keep this in mind. The inner light is something that is present in everyone. So it's not as if people who, the nuns, as they're called, don't have God. They have it just fine, but they can't access it. And they're trying to find some happiness, and it's not happening for them, and they don't see it in institutional religions. But if you can discover that inner divine resource, you got a possibility. Something like centering prayer can help this, and any number of spiritual paths can help this. I mean, God can work through any number of spiritual paths that deal with self-centeredness, selfishness, and block that deeper true self. So the Quaker movement is really a revolt from theories and notions, and it's an appeal to experience. That's really what it is, an appeal to experience. People always say, why are those people all sitting there not doing something? See, ritualistic people are about doing. Shouldn't somebody be doing something? I'm here putting in my hours. Somebody better do something. And they don't do until they practice that connection, that deeper connection. And that's really what they're doing. And it doesn't, they're not doing centering prayer. Well, maybe some of them are, who knows? But they're all trying to get that non-duality sense, which is why they probably do so much good in the world of suffering people, because they're not judgmental. They're actively working towards it in their mission work. You'll find out more often than not when there's an appeal for financial aid or people to help. And we know, well, I would know the Catholic Church would say we did this or we have this association. The Quakers are right there. They're doing it. So you just got to keep that in mind. And when they're sitting there and their eyes are closed, you think, well, isn't that kind of dark? Well, what you realize is the darkness is not dark. That's John of the Cross. The darkness is not dark. Darkness is part of what you're supposed to be experiencing so that you begin to realize the darkness is not dark. I have that experience, and I'm sitting there, my eyes, that's why my eyes are closed. I like that way. I don't leave them open, looking at the floor 4 feet in front of me in a lotus position. My eyes are closed, and it's dark. Yet in that darkness, there's an experience. It's not just darkness. So I'm never by myself in the dark, if you will. And in the universe, we see a lot of darkness. But that darkness is never by itself. It's not dark. It's always connected to a light. But the light is, as John of the Cross says, I've said this before, the light is so pure it appears as darkness. Well, I don't know, but yes, but that's a notion. My experience is that there is something in the darkness, and that someone, it's not a thing, it's someone, the ultimate reality. So what you want is some new eyes, if you will. And that's what you get rid of the spiritual cataracts, new eyes. And the thing is, when you think about it, when they take away the cataracts, they're your eyes. They're the same eyes, if you will. They're the eyes that you were born with. They just got covered up by life. And life can cover up our non-dual existence with the divine. So you don't develop the eyes. Those are what you have. They just get cleared up. So to see through something or to see into something for its real value, its essence, what's invisible to the unseeing, that's what makes for a compassionate, loving, connected person. You don't just see a poor person, a drunk, or a rich person, or a disheveled person, or a person of a different language, or a different color, or a different whatever economic bracket. You don't. Yeah, you might notice those things. You see them, but you don't judge them. That's just outward stuff. And then some of that may not even be real. So they said Jesus was poor. Well, in what sense? So you want to see the depth of a person, and you see them through your own depth. So that's seeing with new eyes. I think that's why we have to have the contemplative path. Otherwise, we're just big trouble. And the imagination is important here. In centering prayer, Thomas Keating and others often talk about don't focus on the imagination. Rufus is much more cataphatic than that. He's focused. The imagination is important here. It works to help you to see better because you consent your attention to a presence. So the presence, the ultimate reality, God, whatever you want to call this reality, this energy, you consent to it. You may not experience it right at the moment, but you consent to it being open to you. And so you're ready to attend to this presence. And then something about the person or a situation begins to evolve. And you see more, if you will. So meditation really is to feed and fertilize the inner depth. And people will say, my prayer is dry. And that's, well, okay, that's your experience of prayer at the moment. But as long as you're at it, you will have a deeper experience. You are watering the dryness, if you will. And sometimes people will say, well, I was having just very fertilized experience last week, and now it's dry. What happened? And as I said, that's your cross. Bear it and keep at it, and God will work through your dry experience. Remember, your dry experience is just your experience. It's an experience. Just don't give up because you've decided what the results are. The results are ever evolving over and over through the rest of our life. So not only religion, but life itself is rooted in the mystical process. I think Rufus Jones sees this. It's life itself. In other words, if you have to go to church is the only way you can find God, you've narrowed. Okay, you can find God that way, but you really narrowed your possibilities because God is much deeper and much more present in everywhere. So life itself is rooted in the mystical process, and to experience life at its depth, we need the mystical. And because whatever breaches, he uses the word breaches of the soul, they become healed. Whatever separations seem to be, they become healed in this whole experience of meditation over not any one particular day or moment, but over a period of time. You will see how your life has changed. And not that your life has changed so you feel hunky-dory every day, but your life has changed in the way you relate to the people around you. And then that changes your life for the better. The example I used was living with these monks. So you think of St. Paul. I'm a Paulist, so we're supposed to be sort of based on Paul, somewhat anyway. Well, what's Paul's idea of salvation? Well, it came from, however he talked about it, and he did talk about it a lot. He didn't talk about it till he had a personal experience when he fell to the ground on the road to Damascus, and he was anything but a Christian. He had a personal experience of an encounter, which you can call a union, with Jesus Christ. And that's what began to change his life. Not immediately, couldn't figure it out, but that personal experience is what really changed him. And then he tried to talk about Jesus Christ from his personal experience. He never talked about Jesus Christ in all the parables and stuff, because he didn't live with him. He didn't know him that way. He knew him from this personal experience. So you don't know, you didn't live with him. You weren't one of the apostles. You can read about him, but it's not enough. I can read about Buddha, but the sense is what about my life? How do I filter Buddha through the experience of my life that I become all that Terry Ryan is supposed to be? So he has in it, Paul, back to Paul, if you will, he has and what Rufus calls an at one ment, A-T apostrophe one ment, O-N-E-M-E-N-T. He has in it one ment that is a non-dual experience of reconciliation. You can go to confession 100 times in my spiritual religion, the Christianity, and not have in it one ment of reconciliation. You'll have an experience of being less shameful, less shamed, less guilty, uplifted because now you feel you're in a better relationship with God, or so on and so forth. But that's all about you in a sense. But it's not the same at one ment, or maybe it is. But then it could be, but then you need to keep with it with your meditation. So confession, meditation, they work together. See, the sacrament's supposed to work with meditation. They're not magic that you do once a week, and then the rest of the time is whatever you're doing, but has, that have much to do with meditation. So this at 1 minute reconciliation, it's a union through love. Love is basis. When you go to confession, guilt and shame or whatever, where you think you're not going to go to heaven, or so on and so forth. So I think some people love God because the alternative doesn't look very good. And so they say love, but how you deal with your neighbor, people who you judge not like you. So you don't want to negate the finite, the world around you, to find the absolute. So you need to remember, how do I parse that one? Well, let's look at something like centering prayer. People practice centering prayer, and but it's supposed to lead to you living in the finite world. So the non-dual infinite, if you will, they call that the infinite experience, is supposed to lead to how you live in the everyday world with the people around you, your crosses, or your work, or your travels, or whatever it is. Or try traveling on an airplane nowadays. You're going through an airport. Oh my God. So how do you live with that? Well, you better have a deeper meditative life, or it's not going to be very good. So you find God in the finite as well. Thoreau said that. The transcendentalists of the 19th century said that. You find God in the finite. So there's a bit of cataphatic in all of that, and you need to keep that in mind. If you're only finding God in the light and the darkness of your meditation, something's missing. It's become an escape. People say, oh, you're in the monastery, you're just escaping real life. I said, no, I got real life here. Some days I'd just rather be a hermit. I'd rather just live with me than anybody else. And then I think about that after a while. I says, no, I don't want to live with me. Oh my God, I'm crazy. Who wants to live with a crazy man? So there's no escape. There's no escape. So I'm thrown into meditation because I without it, it's big trouble. So we have we have powerful instincts and we have powerful habits. Some call them addictions, and how do we let go of them? Exactly, letting go. Isn't that what you practice in meditation? If you want to change your life, I don't mean powerful addiction so much as you want to change the habits of your life. You're not going to do it by willing it. That just doesn't work. It's in meditation that you practice letting go. That's often my sacred word or words. Let go. Just let go. And I'll find myself thinking about something, or just let it go. And you practice it in that half hour or 40 minutes, whatever you're doing. And then you find yourself really, after a while, beginning to let it go in your finite life with other people, places, and situations. Such as getting on the airplane, God is saying, hey, Terry, I got your back. Let it go. Stop whining, and so on. And God is always at work. So religion's focus needs to move from questioning systematics. Systematics all about questions. So Rufus brings that up. Let's see if we can parse that. What is that all about? Well, we want to, instead of being common questions about catechism, what is the incarnation about? Or is Jesus human or divine or something like that? Not that those are not unimportant questions, but I would not look at them without a deeper contemplative life. So what you want is questions of religious experience. Are you having deeper religious experiences in your daily life? What would that be? Experiences of oneness with God. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen the first week of meditation, but what I sense will happen is if you keep at it, you'll begin to see less differences. And that's what compassion is about. Less differences. Jesus is talking about, in everything, I think, he's really talking about his extraordinary experience of oneness with God. I think if you could look at the Gospels from a meditative point of view, you might, this stuff about Jesus going out into the desert and so on and so forth. And, even his whole idea of the Son of Man, as he refers to himself, has no place to lay his head. And you say, oh, that's terrible. But, he also has no worries about keeping up his house or paying his rent or mowing his lawn or whatever, fixing the furniture. He doesn't have any of that. He goes wherever anybody takes him in. And so he's just sort of put aside some things. I'm not saying you have to do that, but just keep in mind, he's had an extraordinary experience of oneness with God. And he can't get that across. He uses parables and stories, and he heals people and so on and so forth. And he talks about the poor and all kinds of things, the lonely, the barren. Well, political and religious institutions, the political leaders, Pilate, and the religious leaders, the Sadducees, whatever, they can't control Jesus' religious experience, but they can kill him for it. And that's often what happens. They kill you to get rid of you. There's, I guess, I don't know, it could be a danger in having religious experiences. I don't know. But what I know it will kill is your old way of life, which I think for many of us, that's not a bad thing to have die. And that's often why people get into meditation, because of what they don't see is the crosses in their life. And they begin, and when everything's going your way, why bother with this stuff? It takes time and energy, and it has a darkness to it, and a sense of abandonment to it, and all the other things we read about in the books. But at heart, Christianity is supposed to be a mystical religion at heart, and everything else in it is to feed the mystical. So why don't we talk more about the mystical? Whatever. The mystical fellowship is talked about in the scriptures, where 2 or 3 are gathered together. Fellowship, and we now use this word, but it was a big buzzword that the Protestant used. We didn't talk about fellowship. We talked about going to Mass on Sunday, the congregation maybe, but fellowship is really how the kingdom is exhibited. And there's these men and women sitting in their building, their Quaker church, if you will, and meditating. That's a fellowship. They're developing a fellowship by first getting in touch with the depths, and then that spreads to one another. And from one another in the room, it will spread to the world. And that's often, just think if you were in a Catholic church and we say, we're all going to meditate. If anybody has anything to say, please stand up. What chaos, because people would be up there talking without meditating. They'd be giving their opinions, political and whatever, because we don't have a deeper contemplative life. So a lot of our rituals to control you. I don't trust that you got anything to say. But you see, the Quakers, they believe, they trust one another. They believe you have something to say. God can talk through any person in that room. God could talk through a child. As a matter of fact, I encourage you to read The Lincoln Highway by Towles, Towles. Big book. Support your local private bookseller and buy it. It's a lot of it is spoken through a little child, Billy, who's 8 years old. He's got a lot more wisdom than anybody else in that book. So the kingdom becomes what you do, not where you go. You can go and to do good works, but it's what you do when you're there that really makes the difference. So you to be missioned is to take your truer self to wherever it is that you are. So if you say, well, okay, I've been meditating. Now I'm going to help this group. I'm going to go there where this group is and help them. Well, just remember, you're taking yourself, and it's what you do, and it's who you are in what is where. What you do will reveal who you are. Catechism won't reveal who you are. That's just a head trip. It's an important head trip, but it's a head trip. But you reveal who you are by what you do. And that's what people pick up on. And that's why a lot of people reject what you say you believe, because they sense something about you in what you do that turns them off. But Jesus said, the kingdom of God is within you. He said, it's within you. He didn't say it can be within you or it will be within you. He said it's already within you. He's talking to everybody who he ever sees. Big crowds. Kingdom of God is within you. But you know what? They didn't hear that because they were waiting for something. Many of the people in that day and age are waiting for what's called an apocalypse, and a special energy and action of God to fix up their world, such as a Messiah. In other words, God, who is transcendent, is going to come with power and energy to make the world the way you want it to be, basically, because the world was already the way Caesar wanted it to be. He was happy, but it wasn't the way people who listen to Jesus wanted it to be. So many of them were waiting for God to do something, not for themselves to do something. And Jesus' experience with God says, hey, I better do something. Well, they didn't get that. So they got legalistic and they got dogmatic. It becomes, okay, God's not acting, but I still believe in God, but I don't have a deeper contemplative experience. So I become dogmatic and ritualistic and legalistic and so on and so forth. And what happens with that becomes a religion of compulsion, but not much significance for real life and not much significance for who you really are. So Jesus is always talking about, ritual can be, as what Rufus Jones calls about the first mile. So you all show up in the chapel, the church of the Quakers, and you sit there. Okay, that's mile one. The second mile is, why don't you pluck out your own eye? Remember that one? If your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. Why don't you get rid of some of the stuff in you instead of complaining about everybody else? And getting together, meditating, which is what you people are doing in SOS, is mile one. Mile two is to deal with the stuff that God reveals to you, or you could call it the unloading or the revelation of. God will just say, here's a real fault you should focus on. And because suddenly you'll recognize it and say, I really got to work on this and stop blaming everybody else. So that's the second mile. It's really a spiritual adventure. Look, I like that. A spiritual adventure. So you're much less bored when you think, I'm on a spiritual adventure. And not many people show up at churches saying, I'm on a spiritual adventure. A lot of them is, I'm on my obligation, or I hope to find God here, or I'm training my child to be a good Christian, whatever it is. It's an adventure, a spiritual adventure, and it starts with the inner life. Or if it doesn't start with that, it gets to it. So the rituals and the rules can help to lead to the interior practice, but you have to have the interior practice at some point so that God is no longer an object, but an experience. I often hear people say, they ask, what is in the tabernacle? That's as much an object as any. What? How about who? And the who doesn't matter if it's not a connectivity experience with you. That's what Holy Communion or Eucharist is to me, a physicality that feeds the spiritual within me, which is why many people feel that Zoom is maybe it's the best they can do, but they really wish they could receive Holy Communion. So you want God not to be a thing, but an experience. And Meister Eckhart is one who said, nothing is so near to me as God. I was amazed. What did I know about Quakers? Rufus Jones, he knew about Meister Eckhart. This man was well read in the mystical traditions of Christianity. And remember, Eckhart got in trouble with the institutional church. They wanted to do him bad, but his Dominican community spoke up for him, and he ended up okay. He says, nothing is so near to me as God. Well, he was the one who said God is no thing. And institutions don't understand. They think you mean God's nothing. Well, yes and no, but contemplative understands that. Brother Lawrence, he knew about Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection. I hope you've read Brother Lawrence. If you haven't, you should listen to one of my workshops someday. But Brother Lawrence, he has an undisturbed, unbroken sense of the presence. Brother Lawrence, I think he was the doorkeeper at whatever religious community he was in. Brother Lawrence of the Resurrection, you were the doorkeeper, which was a great job because it's the way you welcome anybody. And he was a great welcomer because he was undisturbed within. So he was not so disturbed with that which is around him. An undisturbed, unbroken sense of presence. That can come eventually, but you got to keep at it. Now, those who joined thinking of an imminent return, those who joined the Jesus movement or whatever, Christianity, Christians as they were called, thinking of an imminent return. Remember, we hear about that imminent return. Now, here's what Rufus has to say. He said, they saw the Holy Spirit as coming from the outside. It's exactly what you see at Pentecost. You see the tongues of fire on the head, coming down on the head. And it sounds so wonderful, and it is wonderful, but it also perpetuates the idea of coming from someplace else, not from within. The contemplative realizes that the tongues of fire are really always within you, but you've grown cold. Or as is sometimes said, my love for God has grown cool. Or I become indifferent, middling, something like that. So we don't really want that. Not that we don't want a Pentecostal moment, but keep in mind what that thinking is about. And I think Rufus Jones reminds us to think of that. You're looking for God to return and do things. And God is in you. God's returned plenty. And you're the agent through whom God might like to act. A suggestion, okay? So the Quaker meeting is really far removed from ecstasy. I mean, they're not there to have ecstasy. If it happens, it happens. But that's no less an experience of God in the stillness and the silence. That's what Rufus says. We're not here for ecstasy. If we get ecstasy, it's God's doing. And a lot of people give up on this contemplative life because I want ecstasy because I read about it in somebody else. What you didn't read about is how their life changed with that ecstasy. Teresa of Avila, Carmelite, had ecstatic experiences. And a lot of people say, that's what I want that. But then look at the rest of her life. There's lots of crosses and lots of trudging and trying to open up monasteries for women and men, and a lot of rejection. She was getting rejected, and just a lot of mess and suffering and so on and so forth. Well, her experiences led her to do that. And I think that's what makes her such an extraordinary person. Not that she had an ecstatic moment or moments. So you can have powerful raptures. I think Philo, he knows Philo. My gosh. So like Philo, you can have powerful raptures in which you are not aware of where you are or others around you. Okay, that can happen. Enjoy them. But look at the results. Are you more who God made you to be, which in my tradition would be, are you more like Jesus Christ in the way you live your daily life? So you want a practical mysticism, something that comes out of that in the everyday. And a lot of people, Rufus thinks this, he says, a lot of people don't even know they're mystics. He goes, their mysticism is life in action. Well, that's what he's seen. So I have stopped saying that everybody needs to be, although I've said it a lot here, everybody needs to practice an interior life that I practice, because that just is one way. God can act any way God wants. And Rufus has had an experience of what he calls practical mysticism, the way they live their daily life, but they don't have any ecstatic moments. But they do sit quietly, like in the church on Sundays in the Quaker congregation, and they sit during the week, but they may not have any ecstatic moments, but their lives reveal the fullness of God within them. So Jesus is supposed to be the truth and reveals God as Father is his experience. And no, not so much as here's how Rufus sees it. Jesus, the truth, he calls it. He says, reveals God. God is Father. Okay. Or I am the truth, the way, the life, and I am one with the Father. So it's not so much the absolute, the infinite, the omni, this or that, all powerful, because it's not that God isn't, but if that's your focus, you're going to be looking for God to come down, the apocalyptic stuff, from God to come down and fix the world. Not your job, it's God's job. But God is seeking us. God wants to work through us. If we are seeking God as the verb, I often speak of God as the verb. God is action, energy, power, not a thing. So we just try to keep all that in mind. Now, unfortunately, at the moment, we have come to 1 hour. And we're going to take a little break. But before we take this break, I just found out from someone who's been listening to my talks, she never knew that I had to support myself. So I realize I'm not making much of this, and I will be like Jesus, no place to lay my head. In any case, you can support me because I have to pay my own expenses outside of room and board here. I got a lot of other expenses that I'm got to pay for. So Venmo, you can support me on Venmo, and or you can send me a check here at the monastery. And this is going to be up on the screen there. So what we're going to do is take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to do some 20 minutes of quiet meditation. So it's 9:42, or 12:42, 11:42 at your time, whatever it is. It'll be the minute 42. Okay, we'll see you then. Okay, we're back. 9:42, and at this moment, we do 20 minutes of quiet meditation, whatever format you do. And do we have a gong person?
I'm going to do it this morning.
Okay, so
And I just want to say, after we finish, we go into an Our Father. So you can silently pray along with me so that there's not a lot of voices. And I will mute during the 20 minutes, but then unmute, at the end. So everybody will hear the gong in the beginning and the end. Okay? Ready? Okay. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen.
Okay. We're back. And this is a time especially for Q&A, for questions that you might want to ask. And while you're coming up with those questions, I have a comment that might relate to the SOS to Teresa in particular. She's trying to sell a house, and it was some issues in selling it. It didn't quite come off the way she thought. Here's what happened to me. Years ago, we grew up in the Bronx, my family, and we had 4 kids with 2 bedrooms, 3 girls. And I had gone out into the dining area was where my bed was. So I didn't really have much of a permanent place, and we all had 1 bathroom. And my parents were trying to buy a home. What happened was they had found a home that was quite close to the high school that I eventually went to, but it wasn't close to any Catholic grammar school. And they had put down a bid for $24,000, and they thought they had the house. And someone came along and offered $24,500. They got the house. We didn't. And then after that, we found another house, and it was just the right house. It was on a dead-end street, so we had very little traffic, had a bunch of kids on the block, whereas the first house was on a very busy thoroughfare. You couldn't have gone out and played in that street. So the house was on a dead-end street, and we made had some wonderful neighbors. My youngest sister made some good friends right in that neighborhood, and we all could walk to the Catholic school. It was about 4 blocks away. And so I met a bunch of friends there, and so on and so forth, many of whom eventually went to the high school. And now and again, when I had that half-hour walk to the high school, I said, why didn't they buy the house that I could have just dropped on over? But what it would have been a whole different situation. So it all really worked out quite well. And it was where we thought we got screwed. And I think God was really at work. So all you who are trying to buy and sell houses, keep that in mind. So we got any Q&As here?
I wanted to comment that I thought Rufus Jones' idea and the Quakers' idea of everyone having the right to speak is such an interesting dynamic, coming from the Catholic tradition where that doesn't happen during Mass anyway. It happens at other times. But it reminded me, I had an opportunity for a couple of years to be able to go to Mass every morning. And Deacon Dan Alexander had told me once that the backbone of a parish is really the morning Mass, and to see the morning Mass people. So I learned a lot by just interacting during Mass with those people. There was one couple that really struck me. They came every morning together, and I hardly ever spoke to them. I didn't know them outside of Mass, but they came every morning. And then one morning, their son had been in a very bad motorcycle accident, and he was on life support. And I just noticed that they came every day, and it was always announced to continue to pray for them and for their son. And then they had to make the decision to take him off life support, and they did. And that morning they came to Mass. And the morning before the funeral Mass, they came to Mass. And even though they never said anything to me, I was so struck by their faith that every morning started with Mass. And so when my mother was in hospice, she was supposed to only last 3 days, and she lasted 60. But the hospice place was about a mile away from my church. It just reminded me of it was Father Terry's story right now. So it was so convenient for me to go to Mass and then go see my mother and spend the day with her. And she lasted 60 days. So 60 days I went to Mass, and I never thought anything about it, except that was my routine. And then after she passed, and I went to Mass the morning she passed. I knew she was going to pass, and I left her, went to Mass, came back, and she passed away about 10 minutes later. Someone had commented to me that it was remarkable to them that I had done that. And I really learned it from this couple that I never really thanked or anything. So I just find that interesting that we can learn so much from community, even when we're not talking to them.
So true. The Catholic experience of organization was top down, because that's what they knew as successful from the Roman way of government. They saw this works. So it was what they did. It wasn't what Jesus did, but it was what they did to organize and carry on. Whereas the Quakers came out of the Age of Enlightenment, the power of reason, the strength of the individual, and we're all equal, and so on and so forth. And so they were the ones who formed this community of great equality in which anybody can speak. And I think that one of the things that they emphasized, and Rufus Jones says it, is that religion is essentially social. The very root meaning of religio, bridge, connect, it's essentially social. You cannot separate the individual from the group. And what can happen, it doesn't have to happen, but what can happen if you're not developing this deeper interior life is that religion becomes all about you and God. And if it does have a social nature, it's you and God, and you praying to God to change something in your life, because you can't change it. The government won't change it, and no one else seems to have any power. And you want this thing to be changed because you think the results of the change will be best. And that may or may not be. And so I prefer something that comes more from listening and not petitioning. Not that petitioning is wrong or bad or ineffectual, but I'm just so focused on when you ask God to do something, you don't change. You're asking God to change, at least a situation. And I think it's a lot about you being changed. And that's the way you relate better to other people. So that's just sort of my thinking now.
Father Terry, could you put your video back on? It'd be nice to see your beautiful face again.
Oh, I forgot that it was. Okay. There you are. Something that, and I may end with this. It is something that I read someplace recently, but it made great sense to me. We hear a lot of people say, religion interrupted my life. That is, it interrupted something that I had or did and want to continue to have and want to continue to do. And so it's often very concrete. If they say COVID, this whole COVID pandemic is making me miserable. And if you put down, why are you miserable? It's usually because of something, some situation. that is no longer available to them. I can't go to class in person. I have to do Zoom classes. I don't like Zoom. It's not as good as, and so on and so forth. But what someone said to me reminds me of attitudes. It doesn't have to interrupt certain attitudes. And the attitude that this person brought up with is joy. COVID does not interrupt joy. Joy comes from within. And if your joy is from without, that is from outside things, then it's always going to be interrupted by one thing or another. And in this case, it's COVID. So I have to remind myself that, well, my outside life has changed. A lot of the inside attitudes are still available to me if I can allow myself to access them. And so I can ask myself, what can I be joyful about today? Or let's put it this way, gratitude. If you can live with gratitude, I think your day is going to go a lot better. And so I try to remind myself of that. And sometimes I do it by reading certain spiritual books, or not, just a little something in a book, little reflections, books of reflections that I've come to like. And you just get reminded of something from somebody who is experiencing the interior life and saying, here's how it can work in the everyday world. And so I think gratitude is very important, but it's attitudinal. And the one that was brought up in this particular reading today or yesterday was joy. So what can I be joyful about? And as I've said many times, I would not be living in this monastery as full-time as I do if it wasn't for COVID, which shut down my travel, working, in-person business. But I've come to realize that this is a very good place for me to be. If you had read my blog this morning, for instance, this is a very good place for me to be, but I wouldn't have done it without COVID. So I'm not saying COVID's a good thing, but I'm saying some things may have come out of this that are very beneficial, that because you've been prevented from one thing, something else has opened up to you. And you think of all those people that said, I was stuck at home, I couldn't do this, couldn't do that. I says, what a great time to become a contemplative. But because so few people have learned or been exposed to or know about, they just, they went to Netflix. Or maybe they read a lot of good books, which is a good thing too. I was at a bookstore, a private seller bookstore recently in California. They had their best year ever instead of having to close down because people were buying books. They wanted to read books. They were reading novels and fiction and nonfiction and so on and so forth. So for some people, it got them doing a lot more reading. And so you just kind of keep these things in mind. So I will probably be teaching at 9 a.m. my time. If my director, producer, Christopher Lake approves, I'll talk to him on the first Saturday of December and probably the third Saturday of December, something like that. Maybe the first and second Saturday of December, so that we are talking about the current readings in terms of Advent themes. And you'll be able to find this on snowmassbookstore.com, where you will then go into that, and it will point you to the YouTube site where this all is. We'll come in, and then you'll have your meetings, and you'll find out if you want me back doing anything in 2022. But
I'm sure we will. And in the meantime, anyone who wants to contact SOS or become a part of the regular mailing list, just go to www.sosknoxville.org, and we will be able to add you to the list and let you know of upcoming speaking. And we will definitely have Father Terry back next year.
You're going to put that on chat, that long address that they can contact you?
Yes, that would be good. I can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, why don't you do that now? Because I couldn't
Oh,
even.
there it is. It's already on there.
Okay, there you go.
SOS.org.
So that's the
Somebody-
way to get on the SOS Met. You need to be on mailing lists, and to get on my mailing list, it's Snowmass Bookstore at Gmail. Wait a second, snowmassbookstore@gmail.com. Where do they go, Chris? I forget. To get on the mailing list.
That's right. It's bookstore@gmail.com.
Snowmassbookstore@gmail.com is the way you get on the mailing list. Snowmassbookstore.com is the way you get to wherever the chat is, or not the chat, to where my talk is going to be. So I'll put out some flyers here and there as I get them put together. So we're going to do some Adventy things leading up to Christmas. And I thank you all for attending. It's been a great time. We've had a good bunch of months together in this 2021, and we'll see you again next year. All right. Well, have a good Advent. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.
Thanks,